My name is William Michael. I'm the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and in this lesson we're going to study the fifth question of part 1 of St. Thomas Aquinas' famous work, the Summa Theologica. The subject of this fifth question in part 1 is of goodness in general. Let's begin by reading the introduction that St. Thomas provides as we get started with this next question. St. Thomas writes, "We next consider goodness. First, we will consider goodness in general, and secondly, we will consider the goodness of God in particular." Under the first head, that is, in our study of goodness in general, there will be 6 points of inquiry. First, whether goodness and being are the same really. Whether goodness and being are the same. Second, granted that they differ only in idea, which is prior in thought? Third, granted that being is prior in thought, whether every being is good? Fourth, to what cause or to which of the causes should goodness be reduced? Fifth, whether goodness consists in mode, species, and order. And sixth, whether goodness is divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant. So through these 6 separate questions here, we're going to investigate the topics that need to be solved or answered before we can consider goodness in general. And then we'll use this knowledge to investigate the goodness of God in particular. So let's begin with the first question, Article 1. Whether goodness differs really from being. So we're asking, are goodness and being the same thing? And by being here, we'll see this word also referred to, or this idea referred to, with the word existence. So in this reading, being and existence refer to the same thing. Whether goodness differs really from being or existence. We read down here that St. Thomas begins with a quote from St. Augustine and says, "Inasmuch as we exist, we are good." Inasmuch as we exist, we are good. St. Thomas writes, "I answer that goodness and being are really the same, and they differ only in idea." Goodness and being are really the same. They differ only in idea, which is clear from the following argument. The essence of goodness consists in this, that it is in some way desirable. The essence of goodness consists in its desirability. Hence, the philosopher Aristotle says in Ethics, goodness is what all desire. Goodness is what all desire. Now, it is clear that a thing is desirable only insofar as it is perfect or complete. And we'll see what this means later in this lesson, because St. Thomas explains it a little bit more, this idea of being perfect. It is clear that a thing is desirable only insofar as it is perfect. For all desire their own perfection. But everything is perfect so far as it is actual. Everything is perfect so far as it is actual. Therefore, it is clear that a thing is perfect so far as it exists. For it is existence that makes all things actual rather than potential. It is existence that makes all things actual. And a thing is perfect so far as it exists. Hence, St. Thomas writes, it is clear that goodness and being are the same, really. But goodness presents the aspect of desirableness, which being or existence does not necessarily present. So the answer to this question, whether goodness differs really from being, is no. Goodness does not differ really from being. But goodness and being are really the same, and they differ only in idea, which we'll get to in a minute. So there's our answer to article number 1. Article number 2, our second point of investigation, is whether goodness is prior in idea to being. Whether goodness is prior in idea to being. St. Thomas begins with a quote from Aristotle. It is said by Aristotle that the first of created things is being. The first of created things is being. And St. Thomas writes, I answer that in idea, being is prior to goodness. In idea, being is prior to goodness. For the meaning signified by the name of a thing is that which the mind conceives of the thing and intends by the word that stands for it. Therefore, that is prior in idea, which is first conceived by the intellect. That is prior in idea, which is first conceived by the intellect. Now, the first thing conceived by the intellect is being. The first thing conceived by the intellect is being. Because everything is knowable only inasmuch as it is in actuality. Everything is knowable only inasmuch as it is in actuality. Hence, being is the proper object of the intellect and is primarily intelligible, just as sound is that which is primarily audible to the ears. Therefore, in idea, being is prior to goodness. So our answer to this second article, the second point of investigation, whether goodness is prior in idea to being, whether goodness is prior in idea to being, the answer St. Thomas gives us is that in idea, being is prior to goodness. So whether goodness is prior to idea in being, the answer will be no. Being is prior in idea to goodness. In Article 3, St. Thomas asks whether every being is good, or whether everything that exists is good. He begins by quoting sacred scripture. He says, every being that is not God is God's creature. Now, every creature of God is good, and God is the greatest good. Therefore, every being is good. And this is the answer to Article 3. whether every being is good. Every being is good. St. Thomas goes on to write, I answer that every being as being, or everything that exists in so much that it exists, is good. For all being as being has actuality and is in some way perfect, since every act implies some sort of perfection, and perfection implies desirability and goodness, as is clear from Article 1. Perfection implies desirability and goodness. Hence, it follows that every being as such is good. So Article 3, whether every being is good, the answer is yes, every being is good. Article 4, whether goodness has the aspect of a final cause, or the cause for which something is done. Whether goodness has the aspect of a final cause. St. Thomas begins with a quote from Aristotle. The philosopher says in the Physics that is to be considered as the end and good of other things, for the sake of which something is. That is to be considered as the end and the good of other things, for which the sake, or for the sake of which something is or exists. Therefore, goodness has the aspect of a final cause. So the answer to the question proposed in Article 4, whether goodness has the aspect of a final cause, St. Thomas answers, goodness has the aspect of a final cause. He goes on to write, I answer that since goodness is that which all things desire, and since this has the aspect of an end, it is clear that goodness implies the aspect of an end. Nevertheless, the idea of goodness presupposes the idea of an efficient cause and also a formal cause. The idea of goodness presupposes the idea of an efficient cause and also of a formal cause. For we see that what is first in causing is last in the thing caused. Fire, for example, heats first of all before it reproduces the form of fire. Fire heats first before it reproduces the form of fire. Though the heat in the fire follows from its substantial form. Now, in causing, goodness and the end come first, both of which move the agent to act. Secondly, the action of the agent moving to the form. And thirdly comes the form. Hence, in that which is caused, the converse ought to take place, so that there should be first the form whereby it is a being. Secondly, we consider in it its effective power, whereby it is perfect in being. For a thing is perfect when it can reproduce its like. A thing is perfect when it can reproduce its like. As the philosopher says. And thirdly, there follows the formality of goodness, which is the basic principle of its perfection. So in answer to question 4, whether goodness has the aspect of a final cause, the answer is yes. Nevertheless, the idea of goodness presupposes the idea of an efficient cause and also of a formal cause. So much for Article 4. Article 5. Whether the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order. Whether the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order. St. Thomas begins by quoting St. Augustine. He says, Augustine says, these three, mode, species, and order, as common good things, are in everything God has made. Thus, where these three abound, the things are very good. Where they are less, the things are less good. Where they do not exist at all, there can be nothing good. But this would not be unless the essence of goodness consisted in them. Therefore, the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order. St. Thomas then goes on to say, I answer that everything is said to be good so far as it is perfect. Everything is said to be good so far as it is perfect, for in that way only is it desirable. Now, a thing is said to be perfect if it lacks nothing according to the mode of its perfection. A thing is said to be perfect if it lacks nothing according to the mode of its perfection. So a thing is said to be perfect if it is in actuality fulfilling its purpose. But since everything is what it is by its form, and since the form presupposes certain things, and from the form certain things necessarily follow, in order for a thing to be perfect and good, it must have a form together with all that precedes and follows upon that form. Now, the form presupposes determination or commensuration of its principles, whether material or efficient, and this is signified by the mode. Hence it is said that the measure marks the mode. But the form itself is signified by the species, for everything is placed in its species by its form. Hence the number is said to give the species, for definitions signifying species are like numbers, according to the philosopher. For as a unit is added to or taken away from a number, changes its species, so a difference added to or taken away from a definition changes its species. Further, upon the form follows an inclination to the end, or to an action, or something of the sort. For everything, insofar as it is an act, acts and trends towards that which is in accordance with its form. And this belongs to weight and order. Hence the essence of goodness, so far as it consists in perfection, consists also in mode, species, and order. So for article number 5, whether the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order, St. Thomas teaches us that yes, the essence of goodness does consist in mode, species, and order. And lastly, Article 6, whether goodness is rightly divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant. whether goodness is rightly divided into the virtuous, the useless, and the pleasant. St. Thomas begins with a quote from St. Ambrose. He says, on the contrary, Ambrose makes use of this division of goodness. That is, St. Ambrose divided goodness into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant. And St. Thomas Aquinas is beginning his argument with an appeal to the writing of St. Thomas on this passage. St. Thomas goes on to say, I answer that the division properly concerns human goodness. But if we consider the nature of goodness from a higher and more universal point of view, we shall find that this division properly concerns goodness as such. For everything is good so far as it is desirable, and is a term of the movement of the appetite, the term of whose movement can be seen from a consideration of the movement of natural body. Now, the movement of a natural body is terminated by the end absolutely, and relatively by the means through which it comes to the end, where the movement ceases. So a thing is called a term of movement, so far as it terminates any part of that movement. Now, the ultimate term of movement can be taken away in two ways, either as the thing itself towards which it tends, that is, a place or form, or a state of rest in that thing. Thus, in the movement of the appetite, the thing desired that terminates the movement of the appetite relatively as a means by which something tends towards another is called useful. But that sought after as the last thing absolutely terminating the movement of the appetite, as a thing towards which for its own sake the appetite tends, is called the virtuous. For the virtuous is that which is desired for its own sake, and that which terminates the movement of the appetite in the form of rest in the thing desired is called the pleasant. So these three divisions of goodness into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant, and he defines these three different kinds of goodness here in this article. Whether goodness is rightly divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant, St. Thomas Aquinas answers yes. Goodness is rightly divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant. He appeals to authority in quoting St. Ambrose, and he gives a good explanation down in his response. So that's all for the questions of the articles in question number 5. Going back up to the top where St. Thomas introduced this lesson, we can see the 6 questions he proposed to ask. Whether goodness and being are the same, the answer to that is yes. Whether goodness and being differ only in idea, and which is prior in thought, we learn that they do differ only in idea, and we learn that being is prior in thought to goodness. Third, granted that being is prior, whether every being is good. And St. Thomas explained that every being, inasmuch as it is a being, is good. Fourth, to what cause should goodness be reduced? St. Thomas explained that goodness may be reduced to a final cause, but it also has the aspect of an efficient question 4 here, Article 4. To what cause should goodness be reduced? St. Thomas said goodness may be reduced to the aspect of a final cause, but it also may be seen to have the aspect of an efficient and formal cause. Article number 5, whether goodness consists in mode, species, and order. St. Thomas said that goodness does in fact consist in mode, species, and order. And lastly, whether goodness is divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant. St. Thomas says yes, goodness is divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant. So that's all for our first reading of question 5, or lesson 5, in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy's Summa Theologica 1 course. By reading this, by following through this reading with me, you've seen everything that this lesson contains. You've seen the 6 articles into which St. Thomas divides this study, and you've seen Thomas's answer to those questions. Now it's time for you to study this lesson for mastery on your own and complete your lesson assessment. I hope that that's been a helpful introduction to this lesson. If you have any questions, please contact me, and I'll happily respond to them in detail. Work through this reading, study for mastery, complete the assessment, submit it for review, and keep on studying the Summa Theologica of St. Thomas Aquinas. God bless your studies.